Hey everybody, Trump just put out a tweet and it's spot on, so we wanted to cover it. Trump just put out basically the statistics explaining that 37,000 Americans last year died from the common flu, and typically it averages between 27,000 and 70,000 per year. And that even if that, with those deaths, which are horrible, nothing gets shut down, life and the economy go on. And at this moment, there are 546 confirmed cases of coronavirus with 22 deaths. And he says, think about that. Now, he's right. In the United States and around the world, far more people have died from the flu this year than have even been infected. Far more people have died from the common flu in the United States than have even been infected by the coronavirus. And the flu continues to kill many, many, many more people than this COVID-19 virus. So he's going to get accused of trying to undercut the virus and try and make it out to be a hoax, even though we know that Trump never called it a hoax. But he's still right. The common flu has killed more people last year than the coronavirus has. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't take precautions. That doesn't mean you don't wash your hands and avoid touching your face when you're out in public. Obviously, you do that. And if you are elderly or you have an underlying health condition, then you are the most at risk for this virus, just as you would be the most at risk for the flu. But it's interesting. There was an article that came out last week on Business Insider, and the headline reads, "Limited coronavirus testing in the United States has meant its death rate appears alarmingly high, but it will likely drop." Now, what does that mean? That means that because the United States is only testing the most severe cases, the mild cases are not being tested. Those people are not being added to the total numbers of infected individuals, and therefore, every time there is a fatality, that is skewed higher when it comes to the fatality rate. Unfortunately, one of the first outbreaks in the United States was in a Pacific Northwest nursing home. We know that people who are elderly and have pre-existing conditions, they are the most at risk for this virus. So it is incredibly unfortunate that one of the first places this hit was at a nursing home. But the reason that the United States, and we can scroll down and look at this, the reason the United States has a estimated fatality rate at 5.7% is because there's not widespread testing. Now, the Democrats criticize Trump for this. They say that we would be able to stop the virus if there was widespread testing. But they also criticize Trump in saying that there's a high fatality rate and more Americans are dying. It can't really make both arguments. There's a high fatality rate because statistically there are not enough other people being tested. That doesn't mean that this virus is necessarily the most deadly pandemic we've ever seen, which is what a 5.7% fatality rate would be, right? That's way, way up there. That's for every 100 people that get it, there's 5 people dead. That's a serious, serious pandemic. But that's not the case with this virus. We know that practically no one, I think at least a couple days ago, the reports indicated that there were no children or teenagers who had died from this disease, that it skews almost entirely towards the elderly and people with other health conditions. So the reason that the numbers appear higher in the United States is because we don't have a big enough pool of infected individuals to divide it by, right? This appears big because when we have 22 deaths and we only have 500 and some odd confirmed cases, that percentage is high. If we tested everyone, there are people who get this disease and it presents so mildly that they're able to go to work and they just feel like they have the common cold, right? Those people, no matter where you are in the United States or around the world, typically do not get tested. Only people who get tested are the people who present really serious symptoms. So what Trump is trying to say is accurate, that this is not a sky is falling event, and the stock market shedding 1,000+ points almost every day, it feels like right now, is an overreaction at this point. I wanted to cover one more thing. This was a thread on Twitter that's been making the rounds, and I think it's excellent because it points out how the media is covering this the way they want to cover it. And when I say that, I mean that the media is covering coronavirus specifically to hurt Trump. Now, there are usually 2 types of journalists. There's supposed to be opinion journalists, and there's just straight journalists who report the balls and strikes, the facts. But in the age of Trump, we've seen something different. Now, this existed before, but it's more popular now. In the age of Trump, we're seeing the fact journalists become opinion journalists, not by sharing their opinions, right? They're still pretending to be calling balls and strikes, but they editorialize their pieces by choosing what topics to cover and choosing what facts to highlight. And I'll show you what I mean. So, on February 31st, that's when the Trump administration announced its first travel restrictions on China. This was how Politico presented it. The Trump administration's quarantine and travel ban in response to the Wuhan coronavirus could undercut international efforts to fight the outbreak by antagonizing Chinese leaders, as well as stigmatizing people of Asian descent, according to public health experts and lawmakers. So let's unpack this for a second. The Politico author talked to congressmen and he talked to public health experts, and they concluded that Trump's actions were bad. Trump's actions, not only were they bad, they would lead to discrimination against people of Asian descent, and they would actually undercut efforts to stop the virus. Let's keep going. The WHO chief said that widespread travel bans and restrictions weren't needed to stop the outbreak and could have the effect of increasing fear and stigma with little public health benefit. Again, they're criticizing him. Then on February 2nd, the Trump administration ordered U.S. travelers who had been to the different provinces in China to undergo a mandatory quarantine of 2 weeks. Alice Ollstein wrote a Politico article, and she quoted the so-called health experts who said that this would make it worse because people will hide their symptoms because they don't want to go under quarantine. So not only did Trump cut off travel to foreigners coming from China, but he forced Americans returning from these provinces to go into quarantine. And again, Politico criticized him for it. Then we have more articles of them quoting a Democratic congressman saying we shouldn't have an antagonized relationship with the Chinese. We should be working hand in hand. It probably doesn't make sense since the outbreak has already spread to multiple countries. Again, criticizing Trump's efforts. The lead article on Politico as of yesterday was that current and former officials blame the president for creating a no bad news atmosphere, and that has stifled attempts to combat the outbreak, right? They're pushing more and more narratives. It's Trump's fault, Trump's fault, Trump's fault. Then this is what we get from Dan Diamond, who is a writer at Politico. He says, yes, in late January, Trump's initial coronavirus moves were widely hailed as strong and appropriate response. That is bullshit. And that's why this Twitter thread is so great, because it goes through how these people are just opportunists, right? They saw the original Trump actions, and instead of understanding where Trump's mind was at, where his mindset was, they used it to criticize him, right? Saying that Trump was antagonistic towards the Chinese and fueling discrimination against people of Asian descent. They found a way to make a simple quarantine effort and shutting the borders to protect the country into Trump is a racist. Down the list. They criticize him for everything. And now they're trying to revise history. They're trying to pull this revisionist history move and say that in late January, they were widely held as a strong and appropriate response. Well, first of all, they obviously didn't think that because they pushed articles saying that it was wrong. But if it was widely held as a strong and appropriate response, why were they picking their sources the way they were? Why was Politico specifically picking the sources that were criticizing the Trump administration? This thread gets to it. Where is it? It's right here. You had it took weeks for the first paragraph to appear on one of these Politico articles actually backing the Trump administration's early efforts. But then they went right back to criticizing it. So you got to call these people out on it. You got to call them out when they try and push this. They are opportunists, and these are the worst types of journalists, the ones that pick the stories, pick the sources to achieve their own agenda. This isn't just straight balls and strikes. They are actually trying to drive the narrative. And they not only will they not admit that they're wrong, but they're just going to keep shifting. They're going to keep shifting their positions whatever it takes to hurt the president. So I loved this thread. I think this thread was great. We're going to link to this thread in the video description so you can read it and you can see all the sourcing too. But it just really shows just how ridiculous this is. Yes, coronavirus is a dangerous disease, and if you are elderly and you have pre-existing health conditions, you are most at risk. But that is the case for every disease. That's the case for the flu. That's the case even for the common cold. But this is what's most damaging. The fear-mongering, the political posturing, and the selectively sourcing articles to achieve a political outcome. That's what's driving this whole thing. So I don't know. The only way to really combat this is to call these people out. To sunlight's the best disinfectant, right? To drag them into the sunlight and let the country see them for what they are. These are not journalists. They are opinion journalists. They are pundits. And until we start presenting it that way, they're going to keep doing this. So let me know. Do you think that this is right? Do you think that we're off base here? Let us know in the comments and we'll read them.